Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, under Roy Cooper's leadership, thousands of dangerous, violent criminals were released from prison, and a new report from the New York Post shows that more than half of them reoffended after being released. We'll have all the shocking details coming up. And a good Friday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning is brought to you by the law group here in Wilmington, Melissa Gott and her amazing team. For any legal questions or challenges you might be dealing with, you can visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up as we roll through the program here on this busy Friday edition. Let's start off with what I believe is a common sense statement. Taking individuals out of prison who have a track record of being dangerous, violent criminals is not a good idea. I know that this might come as a shock, especially to those on the political left, but just inherently, just based on face value, you would assume that the vast majority of people just across the country, not even here in North Carolina, but across the country, would be able to wrap their head around the concept that if you take individuals who have, unfortunately, a history of committing horrific, violent actions, and you release them early from prison, and I might argue in many cases, release them at all from prison, depending on how heinous of an act they committed, that there is a strong likelihood that those individuals will recommit crimes. Now, they might not be the exact same crimes, but they will recommit some level of criminal activity in the years, and in some cases, just months to follow. That takes us to an exclusive over at the New York Post with this very damning headline. Nearly half of the inmates released under then North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper during COVID-19 have reoffended, including 18 individuals charged with murder. And the second part of that is 18 individuals that were released under Roy Cooper have been recharged with murder since being released. Imagine going to prison, and I know it's hard to do, but you imagine going to prison for murdering somebody, getting released early, and we'll get into the details of why these individuals were released early. It was a total, literal inside job between the ACLU and the Cooper administration. We'll get to that a little bit later on in the program here today. But imagine that you go to prison for murdering somebody. You were released early because of this bogus settlement between the ACLU and the governor here in North Carolina. You're out in some cases for just months, and you murder somebody else. I mean, the whole idea of this is total insanity. But that's exactly what has gone on here in North Carolina under former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, who, of course, as you are well aware, now wants to be one of two individuals representing the state of North Carolina, representing North Carolina values in Washington, D.C., as the senator here, one of the senators here from the great state of North Carolina. Would it be a fair assessment to make and a fair statement to make that the vast majority of North Carolinians are not okay with a constant revolving door of dangerous, violent criminals going through the North Carolina either judicial or prison system? I would argue that that is a very fair statement to make. And I think if you walked around the state and asked 100 people or 200 people what they thought of that statement, you would find very, very strong agreement. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority would say, yeah, of course. Yeah, we don't want dangerous, violent criminals out on our streets. We don't want dangerous, violent criminals in our neighborhoods. I mean, this is something as it relates to, this criminal justice reform, this much larger movement that you see from the more radical wing of the Democrat Party. The whole concept of this is just incredibly flawed from the start, because no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, regardless of what people say, no matter where you fall on the spectrum, nobody wants to live in a community that is dangerous. Nobody wants to live in a community where there's the risk of criminality and violence on a somewhat reoccurring basis. Nobody wants to live in those places. Nobody wants to work in those places. Nobody wants to send their kids to school in those places. Literally nobody. There's not a single person walking the United States that says, oh yeah, I actually love living in dangerous areas. I love living in areas where there is constantly the risk and the threat of violence against me and my family. That person does not exist. Yet Democrats, under these phenomenal catch and release policies, these phenomenal bail reform policies that we see in places like New York, just allow a revolving door for dangerous, hardened criminals. These are not one-off people that have made a bad mistake, screwed up one time, and are now looking for some level of rehabilitation. No, these are individuals, in some cases, that have 20, 30, 40, even 50 arrests on their record. You talk about a long criminal rap sheet. Some of the individuals that Roy Cooper released early in the during COVID-19 have exactly that rap sheet. Not just one or two run-ins with law enforcement, but literally dozens of run-ins. Who wants that? Who is yelling from the rooftops, this is what we want? It is totally illogical. But that is what has gone on here in North Carolina. So getting into the article over at the New York Post, it reads in part, a mass release of North Carolina prisoners under then Democrat Governor Roy Cooper during the COVID-19 pandemic had a devastating effect on public safety, with nearly half of the sprung inmates going on to commit more crimes, according to a New York Post review of state records and reports. At least 3,500 convicts were released as part of a little-known, I guess for national news it would be little known, it was well-known here in North Carolina, settlement between the Cooper administration and civil rights groups in February of 2021. And the New York Post found that more than 600 of those later committed serious felonies like homicides, sex offenses, and other violent crimes, including murders. A staggering 18 of the prisoners released have been charged with murder in the 4 years since. These are individuals that were already in prison, and in some cases already in prison for serious violent offenses or murder charges, released, and in the span of just a couple of years have gone on to not only reoffend, but have gone on to kill other people in North Carolina. This is the reality of these policies. You know, we talk a lot of policy here on the show. We cover a variety of different policy preferences and agendas here in North Carolina, up in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that's important from my vantage point when you're talking about policy and you're talking about things like this is to bring it back to what are the real world implications of said policies. And in the case of what Roy Cooper and the ACLU did, started in 2020, was settled in 2021, the policies of allowing dangerous, hardened criminals back into communities across the state of North Carolina has made our state less prosperous, has made our state less safe. And we'll hear as we go through the article, have ruined and destroyed families here in North Carolina, right? There is a real impact here. This is not some theoretical impact. No, there are families here in North Carolina due to the decisions of Democrat Governor Roy Cooper and the ACLU that have lost brothers, sons, mothers, and fathers, right? There is a real, tangible impact of these policies. Yet, surprise, surprise, our very dishonest media here across the state of North Carolina doesn't have a whole lot to say about it. You would assume a bombshell headline like this over at the New York Post would be running on a revolving news cycle here on television, radio, and newspapers across the state of North Carolina. But to the surprise of absolutely nobody, it's not. Why? Because, as always, it paints Democrats in a bad light. It paints Roy Cooper in a bad light. And we know that the media here in North Carolina, the vast majority of it, is bought and paid for by the Democrat Party. We've got this very shocking report over at the New York Post with the headline, nearly half of inmates released under then North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper during COVID have reoffended, including 18 charged with murder. And so going into some of the details on this, in all, the Post writes in their piece, North Carolina's Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission found in a 2024 report that the recidivism rate of the 3,500 released as part of the settlement was 48%. So nearly 50% of the 3,500 released, you can do the math on that, it's not very complicated, went on to commit another crime. Now, as the Post noted in their previous paragraph, 600 of those individuals committed serious crimes, serious felonies, homicides, murders, sex offenses, other sorts of violent crimes. But if you look at the entirety of the 3,500 people, 48% of them committed some additional crime, whether it was parole violations, getting pulled over for a variety of different reasons. All in all, nearly a 50% recidivism rate amongst these individuals. That is higher than the rate for the nearly 13,000 released over the course of the fiscal year 2021. And the Post, well, they're coming with receipts, no surprise. Among them is an individual by the name of Terrell Brace, who was arrested and charged with the murder of a 23-year-old by the name of Alonte Thompson on January the 29th, 2022, less than a year after being released from prison. Actually, excuse me, not even a year. He was set free in July of 2021. Let's do the math on this. July, August, September, October, November, January. 5 months after being released from prison, Terrell Brace went on to murder a 23-year-old. This, of course, followed multiple jail stints over the decade prior, including some great charges like grand larceny, breaking and entering, and assaulting by strangulation a female with an unborn child. So Terrell Brace is a scumbag. He has a lengthy criminal rap sheet, including trying to strangle a pregnant woman, B&E, grand larceny, stealing. This is the kind of individual that Roy Cooper thought, this guy needs to be back out on the streets. This guy needs to be roaming North Carolina. Brace, who is only 29 years old, was arrested in August of 2022, less than a month after the murder, following a 7-month investigation, and pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter 1 year later. He had been expected to be released before the fatal shooting of Thompson, but got out even earlier due to the Cooper settlement. Thompson's mom, Deborah, places, quote, the complete blame on the then governor for the death of her son, who was coming home from a party with friends when he saw a fight break out. He tried to intervene, and for that, he was shot and killed. With Deborah Thompson telling the New York Post, why would you release somebody like that? They're already showing they're a gangster to society. You're going to release a menace on the streets. And for Thompson, he left behind a young daughter who is now 6 years old after he was murdered back in 2021. What a miserable story. And if that was the end of it, yes, it would be, of course, bad anytime that we're talking about somebody getting murdered and leaving young children behind. I mean, it literally doesn't get much worse than that. But unfortunately, the article goes on. The story goes on. The saga, the heartbreak goes on and on and on and on. Because, again, no surprise to you or me, to anybody with even the most basic lick of common sense can wrap their head around, Releasing dangerous, violent criminals might have the result of more dangerous, violent criminals out on the street. And that's exactly what has happened in the state of North Carolina under Roy Cooper. With Deborah Thompson going on to tell the New York Post, I still have his goals, referring to her now dead son who was murdered by a dangerous, violent criminal that Roy Cooper let out of prison. I still have his goals that he wrote out. He was at school for computer science, and he was doing very well. Deborah Thomas is now studying for law school, a choice that she says was inspired, unfortunately, by her son's murder. The release of criminals during the pandemic was not unique to North Carolina and has been highlighted by Republicans as Cooper seeks to be the first Democrat elected to the United States Senate from North Carolina since 2008. Former Republican National Committee man and former head of the North Carolina Republican Party, Michael Whatley, who of course is Cooper's opponent, has been hammering the Democrat ex-governor in recent weeks over his administration's settlement with civil rights groups. With a Cooper campaign spokesperson saying in a statement, quote, keeping the public safe is Roy Cooper's top priority, which is why he refused to commute sentences when outside groups asked him to do so during the pandemic. I'm sorry, hold on a second. Keeping the public safe is Roy Cooper's top priority? The guy that released 3,500 prisoners early? His top priority is keeping the public safe? Play that one out for me. Make that make sense. Your top priority is keeping the public safe. Yet the ACLU, who of course you're friendly with because you're also a radical left-wing Democrat, sues your administration and says, oh my God, you've got to release these dangerous, hardened criminals from prison because they might die of COVID-19. Who cares if they go back out on the streets and start murdering, 20-year-olds across our cities here in North Carolina? That is far less of a concern than these individuals getting COVID-19 in prison, right? That was the big concern. We've got to get these people out of prison because they might get COVID-19. So great. So they didn't get COVID-19. They were released from prison, and then they are out on the streets murdering people. I would argue that getting COVID in prison is significantly less worse than murdering somebody on the streets. I know that might make me kind of a radical in my thoughts, a radical in my opinion, but I would argue that dumping dangerous, violent, hardened criminals with CVS receipt length criminal rap sheets is not good for the state of North Carolina. With the Cooper spokesperson going on to say, after Roy fought against these releases in court, North Carolina law enforcement officials and parole officers looked to similar criteria that President Trump used a year prior when his administration released thousands of federal prisoners due to COVID-19. So it's Donald Trump's fault. I mean, that's kind of what the statement here from the Cooper campaign is. Well, we did exactly what Trump did. So now hold on a second here. Donald Trump is a dictator, as we understand it. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. He is akin to Adolf Hitler. He's a Nazi, right? He's a racist, all this other stuff. Yet the Roy Cooper at the time when he was governor was using what Donald Trump used a year prior when his administration released. That doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you follow in the footsteps of a guy who's literally destroying the fabric of the United States? See, it doesn't work. You can't talk about how Donald Trump is the most evil, awful, terrible person that has ever existed for 10 years straight and go, well, we did exactly what he did. We just followed in his footsteps. Totally illogical and totally hypocritical. We'll get into the details on this settlement between the ACLU and the Cooper administration at the time that allowed these hardened criminals back out on the streets. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, reminding you that when any legal questions or challenges arise, put your trust in the law group. They are located right here in Wilmington and going all the way back to 2003. Their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the problem, the issue, the question, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or again online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team's continued financial support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More on Roy Cooper's phenomenal plan to release all of these horrific criminals out onto the streets of North Carolina. This very damning exclusive over at the New York Post. All that coming up as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Friday morning, streaming live at YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. A good Friday to you, and welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue coverage today of a bombshell story over at the New York Post. They've got it as an exclusive, as 48% of the inmates that were released under Roy Cooper's settlement with the ACLU during COVID-19 went on to commit additional crimes here in North Carolina, including 18 of the individuals who went on to then murder people additionally after being released. Many of those individuals already in prison for committing the heinous act of murder. Roy Cooper said, yeah, come on out. We'll let you free. COVID-19 is real scary and real dangerous, so we'll let you out of prison, and we'll just hope and pray and cross our fingers that you don't go back out onto the streets of North Carolina and murder people. But of course, that is exactly what happened, which should not be a surprise to anybody. So this is how this whole process worked out. The ACLU and other groups, left-wing groups, surprise, surprise, sued the Cooper administration in April of 2020 to prevent convicts, and this is a direct quote from the lawsuit that the ACLU and these other left-wing groups filed, to, quote, stop them from dying behind bars during this global emergency. That was what the ACLU said in April of 2020. We have to release these dangerous, violent, hardened criminals from prison so they don't die behind bars during this global emergency. That they can kill your son, they can kill your daughter, kill your mother, kill your father. That's fine. We just have to make sure that they don't die behind bars in prison. We, of course, know that COVID-19 was nowhere ever near the risk that those on the political left made it out to be. Those in the healthcare industry made it to be in the early days, but it's okay. It doesn't matter if your 21-year-old son was murdered by a dangerous repeat offender. At least he didn't die of COVID. You can wear that as a badge of pride as you mourn and continue to grieve as a family that has now lost a loved one thanks to Roy Cooper's and the ACLU's disastrous thoughts. So all of that, the lawsuit April of 2020 resulted in a February the 25th, 2021 settlement that let out more than 3,500 prisoners that year, which was one of the largest releases anywhere in the nation. And let me just take a step back because it's important to note how this works. The ACLU and these other groups sue a Democrat administration like the Cooper administration here in North Carolina, knowing that they'll get a favorable settlement. Right? It's Democrats suing Democrats. That's how the process works. And Cooper can stand up and say, I fought back against it. I was fighting against it, but we had to settle. That's the little inside job in all of this. The very left-wing ACLU suing the very left-wing governor of North Carolina. It's literally a put job, which is exactly what went on and caused 3,500 criminals to be released. Cooper, who served as the North Carolina Attorney General before being elected governor in 2016 and completing 2 terms, narrowly avoided releasing as many as 18,000 prisoners under pressure from activists before the court-ordered settlement. Among those freed in the months immediately preceding the settlement was another individual, Kashan Norell, who had been set for an October the 2021 release date, but ended up getting out more than a year prior, according to details from the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections. Norell, who is now 29, is serving life in prison after being convicted of first-degree murder in March of 2023 for a double shooting that happened near Raleigh that took the life of 34-year-old David Chavez and injured another woman in Raleigh. Carrie Chavez, who's 65 years old, told the New York Post she doesn't blame Roy Cooper in particular for her son's murder, but criticized what she called a dysfunctional system. I'm not going to pile on a mother that has lost her son. I'm not going to do that. That's not the business that I'm in. But this was not a dysfunctional system. There was no dysfunction here at all. The ACLU and the Cooper administration planned this thing out. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the objective was. They knew what the goal was of releasing these prisoners. With her telling, again, this is Carrie Chavez, her son, David Chavez, 34, murdered by a dangerous repeat offender, told the New York Post in part, they shouldn't let him out. They need to pay for what they did. He'd already killed someone before. They shouldn't have even been given the opportunity to let him out. I'm still grieving for my son. The pain is never going away. Norell had previously been convicted of murder as a juvenile after he shot 2 people, one of whom died in a school parking lot when he was just 17 years old. Again, my intention here is not to pile on to a grieving mother, but how can you not blame the Cooper administration? He literally released your son's killer who had already been convicted of murder. There's only one person to point the finger at. It's not the Department of Adult Corrections. It's Roy Cooper. That's who decided to do this. That's who allowed this to happen. I don't have anything else to say, but that's the case. This is the only reason this is happening and did happen is because of Roy Cooper. More than 215,000 inmates exited the facilities between February of 2020 and February of 2021, according to Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that came out a couple of years later. And in many states, including North Carolina, prisoners were released as part of a variety of these different settlements and legal challenges by the ACLU. Last month, a representative for the state's Department of Adult Corrections told the New York Post, the people managing the settlement process worked very hard to find candidates for release that presented the lowest risk to public safety using risk assessment tools and knowledge of past behavior. Knowledge of past behavior? You guys released murderers from prison early. What? Past behavior. What sort of past behavior is worse than murdering somebody? Maybe being a pedophile? That's it. Those two things are tied at the top of the list. What could possibly be worse on your criminal background? What could possibly be worse in your past than murdering somebody? But don't worry. DAC here in North Carolina, tip-top shape, tip-top work using risk assessment tools and knowledge of prior behavior. I mean, what the hell does that even mean? That is totally illogical. And of course, it wasn't just here in North Carolina. In New York State, former governor there, Democrat governor, surprise, surprise, Andrew Cuomo, oversaw the release of more than 11,000 inmates with about a 19% recidivism rate, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And in California, the Democrat governor there let out at least 15,000 criminals, around one-third of whom ended up back behind bars, according to reports last year from a media outlet known as Cal Matters. In North Carolina, though, the New York Post writes in their analysis of all of this, the 18 murder charges are raising eyebrows. And of course, they've got another example. Brandon Locklear, who's 38 years old, was also sentenced last year to 13 years in prison for shooting a mother dead on the side of the road in August of 2023. He had been released early in August of 2021 while serving a previous sentence for assault with a deadly weapon, according to court papers. No problem there at all. Brandon Locklear, 38 years old, released, murder somebody. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Another reoffender by the name of Darren Owens was hit with a 10-year federal sentence for being involved in a November the 2021 drive-by shooting. Owens, who is just 24 years old, had been released in June of 2021, months before he was scheduled to be released. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on. We have a problem not only here in North Carolina, but I would argue across the nation of not holding criminals accountable. Are there people that can clean up their act after committing a crime? Yes. And for those individuals, we should give them another opportunity. But the numbers and the facts show a very different picture, ladies and gentlemen. The numbers show that the recidivism rate amongst these individuals, amongst dangerous, violent criminals, is incredibly high. In the case here in North Carolina, literally almost 50% of the people that Roy Cooper thought was a great idea to release from prison. It's so incredibly stupid. It's so incredibly disastrous. Yet it was happening right in front of our very eyes. And it's now years and years later that we've actually got all of the information that we can start looking at these details, looking at who these people are, and figuring out why the hell something like this was going on. Why was this allowed to happen? Why were these individuals released early, in some cases years early, for the previous violent criminal acts that they had portrayed upon the people of North Carolina? This story over at the New York Post, the exclusive running yesterday, is showing a very disastrous set of decisions by the Roy Cooper administration at the time, governor here in North Carolina, releasing more than 3,500 dangerous, violent, hardened criminals back out onto the streets of North Carolina, 18 of whom would go on to murder individuals. And the New York Post has got, well, more examples. How about Gary Jenkins? He was charged with fatally stabbing a man at a convenience store in January of 2022 and eluded police for more than a month before his capture. The now 64-year-old man had a long rap sheet of assault and drug charges and had been released early from prison in May of 2021, under this settlement. And again, we just, the Department of Adult Corrections told the New York Post just back a couple of months ago that they were using risk assessment tools and knowledge of past behavior. So how did that work here for the 65-year-old who has a lengthy criminal rap sheet of assaults and drug charges, breaking and entering, all just the normal things that everybody's doing on a day-in, day-out basis? How about two more reoffenders, Fred English and Lucas Scorns, who were charged for the deaths tied to fentanyl use, with Scorns pleading to second-degree murder of his 16-month-old daughter in April of 2025. Yeah, sounds great. Bravo, Roy Cooper. Give you a nice little golf clap there. A 16-month-old girl, young child, dead because of her scumbag father who was leaving some sort of fentanyl-laced drug or fentanyl-laced gummy hanging around. How about another example? Convicted felon Jamie Splite was also let loose in November of 2020, 9 months before his projected release date, and was subsequently charged with second-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping in April of 2021, in which at that point he would not have been out of prison. The 32-year-old was previously sentenced for indecent liberties with a child and failure to register as a sex offender in August of 2017. Spite was among more than 80 released convicts who were charged with sex offenses after getting out of prison after Roy Cooper released them. The main Senate Republican candidate arm has also attacked Cooper over the release of DeCarlos Brown Jr. In case you weren't aware, he was another individual that Roy Cooper thought would be a good idea to have back out on the street. We now know he is a mentally disturbed, literally crazy person who decided it was in his best interests back in August of last year to ride the Charlotte Light Rail without paying for it and then slicing the throat of 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska. That story, well known. The DeCarlos Brown legal saga is currently ongoing here in North Carolina. There's two different criminal proceedings against him, federal charges, and then in the state, the murder charge. And in both of those, there are discussions going on about him being mentally incapable of standing trial. Yet, the Cooper administration and officials in Charlotte, surprise, surprise, thought it was a good idea for him to be back out on the streets. And he has recently told his defense attorneys that he believes that there is a foreign substance that controls his actions and tells him what to do. That he is, like, for all intents and purposes, possessed. And he was possessed to slice the neck of 23-year-old Irina Zarutska on the Charlotte Light Rail last year. That's the kind of people that Roy Cooper and the Department of Adult Correction says, yeah, that's a useful member of society. Yeah, that's a guy that we want back out on the streets. I mean, it's just total insanity. Total insanity. State records going through all of this, a Cooper campaign representative responding in a statement to this story from the New York Post saying, while Roy spent his career putting rapists and violent criminals behind bars, Michael Whatley spent his appointing a convicted sex predator who served time in prison for multiple counts of felony child sex crimes to a powerful position within the North Carolina Republican Party. This is, of course, referring to convicted sex offender Harvey West, who had pled guilty to multiple counts of indecent liberty with a child back in the year 2000 and was released in 2006, who would then later serve on two GOP committees here in the state of North Carolina, and was in fact appointed by Michael Whatley. So that's the cover on all of this. A guy who, yes, committed indecent acts of indecent liberties with a child 26 years ago, served his time in prison, 6 years, was released, has not reoffended, has not recommitted any crimes. That's the cover that the Roy Cooper campaign is using to justify 18 additional murders here in North Carolina, a 48% recidivism rate amongst the dangerous criminals that Roy Cooper released. There's a great website that has just been spun up here in North Carolina. If you haven't seen this on social media or haven't heard about it, I wanted to pass it along to you today because it is really eye-opening and I'll admit even a little bit scary to take a look at. The URL is CooperReleasedHim.com, CooperReleasedHim.com, and it shows all of the 3,500 criminal offenders that the Cooper administration released in that settlement that we were just talking about between the ACLU and the Cooper administration. You can search by name, you can look by county, you can search a variety of different offenses. It is a very a thorough website showing the individuals, and just by looking at the homepage, you can see offender after offender, first-degree murder, first-degree murder, first-degree murder, first-degree murder. And these are individuals that Roy Cooper and the Department of Adult Corrections gave the thumbs up to and said, yeah, we'll just let these guys out. Yeah, just go ahead and drop them off somewhere. I'm sure that they've served their time. I'm sure that they won't get back out of prison and reoffend. This whole thing really boils down to one of the quintessential differences between the right and the left, and that has to do with accountability. And the left, as you've heard me state many, many times, has a major accountability problem. They do not believe that people should be held responsible and accountable for the things that they do. And with that, it creates this disastrous set of policies that make states, cities, towns, and counties across the United States more dangerous. We're, of course, focusing here on North Carolina and this settlement between the ACLU and Roy Cooper, but this is a larger national problem. And it is something that festers in these blue cities, these blue towns, these blue states across the U.S., where they believe that individuals that have committed some of the most heinous acts that you can imagine, reading the court records, reading the court transcripts of these trials is disgusting when you hear what some of these individuals did to their victims. And those on the political left, many of them on the political left, just kind of shrug their shoulders, wipe their hands clean and say, yeah, but there's something that is a reason why this person had to do this, and therefore they should not be held accountable. There's always an excuse. Oh, this person grew up in abject poverty. That's why they're on this track. Oh, this person didn't have access to this, that, or the other, and the system failed them. Therefore, that's why they went out and committed the heinous act of murder. It doesn't matter to me what the reason is. Obviously, I'm not talking about self-defense. But in this, it doesn't matter what the reason is. These are individuals that have demonstrated that a solution to a problem is to murder another person. And this is who Democrats want roaming the streets of North Carolina, want roaming the streets of the United States. And why? Why? What is the benefit of all of this? What is the plan here? It's totally illogical, and it is incredibly unpopular. Again, I mentioned this a little bit ago. If you talk to 200 people today that live in the state and ask them if they thought that it was a good idea to release dangerous, hardened criminals from prison, you would find, I would assume, close to a 100% agreement with the statement of, no, of course not. No, we would never want to do it. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's what you would hear from people because, again, it's just basic logic. And it goes back to the larger point of nobody wants to live in an area where things are dangerous. Nobody wants to live in an area where they have to wonder and worry, oh, is today the day that I get stabbed walking to work? Case in point, look at what's going on in a city like San Francisco, where their homeless population is so out of control that half of the city is shut down and all the businesses have said, to hell with this, we're moving. Hell with this, we're going to find somewhere else to operate. It's not safe for us. It's not safe for our employees to have homeless people running around the streets, or in most cases, strolling around the streets with heroin needles hanging out of their arms. Doesn't create a very good environment for business to thrive. It doesn't create a very good environment to encourage employees to come to their job. I know, shocking. I know, surprising. But that's what happens. That's the real life implications, the real life results of these disastrous policies. We know that the Democrats' thoughts on law and order and holding people accountable suck. They don't have good policies on this stuff. They believe that nobody is responsible for anything that they do, and they will always find an excuse. The $1 million question with this: will it stick to Roy Cooper? Here is the unfortunate reality of the former Democrat governor here in North Carolina. He has an insane amount of controversies under his belt. There are things talking about NCORE, the disaster of hurricane recovery and relief in eastern North Carolina. You can talk about the backlog of rape kits under his watch as the attorney general, which he was in that position for like 16 years. There are plenty of controversies that Roy Cooper has had. This inmate one is just another to pile onto it. But because we have such a dishonest corporate media structure here in North Carolina, people just don't know. And there's a reason why one of Roy Cooper's nicknames is Teflon Roy, because nothing sticks to him, because our media here in North Carolina just doesn't cover this stuff. It's not going to be the front page of the News and Observer. You're not going to see it in constant loop on TV, news, or radio here in the state. Now, of course, if it was a Republican who had these issues under them, it would, of course, be the top story day in and day out. But it's not when it's former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper. And so I would say that it is incumbent on us as informed citizens, informed voters here across the state of North Carolina, as you're having these conversations with folks through the remainder of this year as we get closer to the general election in November, that you make sure that people know Roy Cooper's track record. They know about this stuff. Because if you just listen to the media reporting of Roy Cooper, you think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, that he's the greatest politician that the state of North Carolina has ever had, and we would be lucky to have him representing us in the United States Senate. Reality paints a very different picture, but the media, which of course all controlled by the left, isn't interested in talking about that stuff. They're not going to cover this. So it's going to be the grassroots. It's going to be people like you and I talking about this stuff to voters, to our friends, to our neighbors, to our coworkers, and making sure that they truly understand there's a little bit more than meets the eye here with old Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, the old country boy from Nash County, as he likes to present himself. I'll have a copy of this report from the New York Post, plus the website Cooper Released Him, which is a phenomenal resource. You can view that, and we'll have all those links over in the show notes at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Well, before we get out of here on this Friday and wrap up another week, want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers, including my mother here in the audience on the Nick Craig Show. That coming up on Sunday. Hopefully you enjoy a nice, relaxing weekend on Mother's Day coming up Sunday, May the 10th. Well, that's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. LawGroupNC.com is their website. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy the Mother's Day weekend. We're back Monday morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.